Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 3rd December 2019. And the articles that we will discuss are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now this article on page number 1 is related to the issue of creamy layer in SC/ST category. So in this article, the government is seeking a review of a previous Supreme Court judgment related to the SC/ST category's creamy layer issue. And in this case, the central government has asked the Supreme Court whether the concept of creamy layer should apply to the SC/ST or not should be referred to a 7-judge bench. And that is because previously in the 2018 judgment, the Supreme Court had provided for the concept of creamy layer to be applicable to the SC/ST category. And also in the 2018 judgment, the Supreme Court had refused the government's plea to refer the 2006 Nagaraj case judgment to a 7-bench judge. So again, the Supreme Court will be analyzing if this plea of the central government will be permitted or not. So this shall form a part of the General Studies paper 2 under the topic Constitution and Polity, and also under mechanisms and laws for the betterment of the vulnerable sections. And as we note that reservation is one of the mechanisms which has been envisaged for the betterment of vulnerable sections like the SC/ST and the OBC categories. So in this background, what we will do is that we will try and learn about the history of all the judgments related to reservation in promotions and the concept of creamy layer for SC/ST. Now this concept of creamy layer was first introduced by the Supreme Court judgment of 1992, that is famously known as the Indira Sahni judgment. And in this, it provided that for reservations to the other backward classes, the creamy layer of this class should be excluded from the benefit of reservation. And this class inside the backward classes would be decided based on the economic criteria which was given out by the Supreme Court. So for example, all those people who are holding constitutional positions, their children will not be provided reservation under the creamy layer concept. So that is how Supreme Court separated the creamy layer from the other backward classes. Now the three important judgments of the Supreme Court related to the issue of creamy layer and reservation in promotions are the 1992 Indira Sahni case, the 2006 M. Nagaraj case and the 2018 Jarnail Singh case. Now in the Indira Sahni case of 1992, the Supreme Court had ruled that the concept of creamy layer will be applicable only to the other backward classes, and it would not be applicable to the category of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. However, in this very judgment, the Supreme Court rejected the concept of reservation in promotions. So these were the two important outcomes of the 1992 Indira Sahni case related to the concept of creamy layer and the reservation of promotions. So in this background, let us look at the key highlights of these famous judgments, that is the Indira Sahni judgment, the M. Nagaraj judgment, and what was held in the Jarnail Singh case of 2018 judgment. And in this we will look at the observations of the Supreme Court regarding the creamy layer concept, whether it is applicable to SC/STs or not, and what was the observation of Supreme Court regarding the issue of reservation in promotions. Now in 1990s, the Parliament provided reservation to the other backward classes. And this reservation was provided after the famous Mangal agitation. However, this reservation to the other backward classes was challenged in the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court came out with the famous judgment of Indira Sahni in the year 1992. Now, what was held in this judgment was that the creamy layer principle is only confined to the backward classes. And such concept of creamy layer was not relevant to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes reservation. Second observation of the Supreme Court in this case was that there shall be no reservation in promotions and the reservation should be confined to initial appointments only. So thus in the Indira Sahni case, the Supreme Court had clearly rejected the provision of reservation in promotions. However, it had held that the concept of creamy layer was applicable only to the other backward classes and could not be extended to the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribe category. Now, justifying the no reservation in promotions policy, the Supreme Court had observed that the reservation exists to create a level playing field and to remedy the unequal starting positions. And that is why it provided that the reservation should only be confined to the initial appointments under the Government of India and the governments of various states. And this justification was applied by the Supreme Court for not providing the concept of reservation in the promotions in the government services. Now, as the Supreme Court in the famous Indira Sahni case had done away with the provision of reservation in promotions, the Parliament enacted the 77th Constitutional Amendment Act. And this was enacted because the government felt that the representation of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes in the services in the state had not reached the required level. So the government felt that the representation of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes in the services was not at an adequate level, and that is why they had enacted this 77th Amendment Act. And that is why it added the Article 16(4)(a) to the Indian Constitution. And this article empowered the Parliament to make any provision for the reservation in the matters of promotion if the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes are not adequately represented in the services of the state. So this was one of the enabling provisions that was inserted in the Constitution of India and which empowered the state to make provisions for the reservation in the matters of promotion for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. However, again this 77th Constitutional Amendment Act was challenged in the Supreme Court. And the judgment of the Supreme Court on this challenge is famously known as the M. Nagaraj case of 2006. So regarding the constitutional validity of the 77th Amendment Act, the Supreme Court observed that this Amendment Act was valid and it provided only enabling provisions to the government. However, if the government wishes to make the provisions for reservation to SCs and STs in case of promotions, the government will have to collect quantifiable data to show the backwardness of the class and the inadequacy of representation of that class, and at the same time the government should also take care of the maintenance of efficiency, and this was provided in the Constitution of India itself. So in M. Nagaraj case, the Supreme Court provided for two conditions based on which the government could extend the reservation in promotions to SCs and STs. The first was that the government had to collect quantifiable data which should reflect the backwardness of any caste and also the inadequate representation of that class. And all this had to be done while maintaining the clause of efficiency which was provided in the Constitution itself. So the Supreme Court in the M. Nagaraj case subjected the provision of reservations in the promotions for the members of SC/ST to three conditions. First was that the backwardness of any class. So there was a need for quantifiable data to prove the backwardness of that class or caste. Second was the inadequacy of representation of that class. And thirdly, the administrative efficiency which is provided under the Article 335. And this Article 335 provides that the claims of the members of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes in appointments to the services under the union and the state governments should be consistent with the maintenance of efficiency of administration. So this is one of the clauses that has been provided in the Constitution of India itself regarding the provision of reservation to the SCs and STs. And this reservation to the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes should be provided keeping in mind the provision of maintenance of efficiency of administration. And that is why the Supreme Court had provided that first the government should provide quantifiable data to prove the backwardness of SC/STs, and at the same time it should also take care of the administrative efficiency which was provided under Article 335 of the Indian Constitution. Now again a review petition was filed in the famous Jarnail Singh case, and the judgment of Supreme Court came out in the year 2018. So the first observation of the Supreme Court was that there is no need to revisit the judgment of M. Nagaraj case by a 7-judge constitutional bench. Second important observation of the Supreme Court in this case was that the states no longer need to collect quantifiable data on the backwardness of the SC/STs in granting the quota in promotions. However, the states will have to back it with data to show their inadequate representation in the cadre. Now we know that the Supreme Court in the Nagaraj judgment had provided that the state will have to prove the backwardness of the class. And secondly, it will have to provide quantifiable data for the inadequacy of representation. So these were the two conditions imposed by the Supreme Court in the Nagaraj case of 2006. However, in the 2018 Jarnail Singh case, the Supreme Court did away with the condition of quantifiable data on the backwardness of SCs and STs for granting quota in promotion. Now, this was mainly done because there was no clear definition of backwardness. For example, this backwardness can be educational backwardness, it can be social backwardness, and also it is related to the historic practice of untouchability. And that is why it was difficult to quantify the backwardness of any particular category. However, at the same time, for providing the reservation in promotions to the SC/STs, the state will have to provide data regarding the inadequate representation of the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes in various services. So the first condition, that is the government will have to collect quantifiable data on the backwardness of SCs and STs, was done away with. And that was mainly because there was no clear definition of backwardness. And as we note that in the case of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, the backwardness arises from the historic disadvantage of untouchability. And that is why the Supreme Court cancelled this condition or did away with this condition of providing quantifiable data on the backwardness of SCs and STs. Now, besides these two observations, the Supreme Court in this Jarnail Singh case has said that the principle of creamy layer can be extended to the members of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes for the promotion in government services. So this was a new addition in the Jarnail Singh case of 2018, that it extended the principle of creamy layer, which was first used by the Supreme Court in its Indira Sahni judgment. And this principle of creamy layer could now be extended to the members of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes for promotions in the government jobs. So these were the three important Supreme Court judgments regarding the extension of principle of creamy layer to the members of SC/STs for the promotion in government jobs. And in the present news article, the central government is again seeking a review of this judgment of 2018, and it wants that the Supreme Court should refer this matter again to a 7-judge bench. And that 7-judge bench should now analyze whether the concept of creamy layer should be applied or not to the scheduled tribes and scheduled castes in case of reservation in promotions. Now, while providing the concept of creamy layer for the reservation in promotions to the SCs and STs in the government jobs, the Supreme Court had observed that unless the creamy layer principle was applied, those genuinely deserving reservation would not have access to reservation, and those who were undeserving within the same class would continue to get the benefits of reservation. And this created a kind of inequality, and which stands against the basic principle of right to equality or the fundamental right of equality provided in the Indian Constitution. So these were the observations of the Supreme Court in its various judgments regarding the concept of reservation in promotions in the government jobs for SC/STs, and also the applicability of the principle of creamy layer. So the present status is that the centre has filed a plea in the Supreme Court to review this judgment of 2018. And the centre has asked that the Supreme Court should refer this judgment to a 7-judge constitutional bench. Now the Supreme Court will take a view on this plea of the centre in the coming 2 weeks. So this is a news in transition. And with this, let's take up the next news article. Now this article on page number 15 talks about one of the important indicators which can be important for preliminary examination, and that is Purchasing Managers' Index. So this shall form a part of the preliminary examination under the topic economic development. And in this article, we will try to look at some important facts and information regarding this Purchasing Managers' Index. Now the prelims compass of Indian economy of 2019 provided various aspects of the Purchasing Managers' Index. And regarding this, you should note that it is considered as an indicator of the economic health and business momentum in the industrial sector in an economy, and also it reflects the investors' sentiments regarding the manufacturing sector of economy. Now it should be noted that this PMI or the Purchasing Managers Index is published separately for manufacturing and for the service sector. However, it is the Purchasing Managers Index or the PMI for the manufacturing sector which is extremely important reflection of the functioning of an economy. Now, if the PMI data reads above 50 points, it indicates that there is an economic expansion in manufacturing or either the service sector. While if the reading of this PMI is less than 50, it shows that there is contraction in the economic activities. For example, India's PMI has gone down to as low as 47.9. And in the present case, this PMI was 51.2 in the month of November as provided in today's news article. So regarding this, you should note that what was the origin of the PMI or the Purchasing Managers' Index. So the Institute of Supply and Management ISM, which is based in US, originally developed this concept of PMI. And this ISM was a non-profit group founded in 1915. So regarding the PMI which is published in India, you should note that the PMI data is published by the Japanese firm Nikkei. However, it is compiled and constructed by the market economics of the HSBC. And which are the indicators which are used by the PMI? So it uses 5 major indicators, and these include new orders, inventory level production, supplier deliveries, and the employment environment. Now, the important thing that should be noted about the PMI is that it does not track the volume of production in the manufacturing sector, and it only tracks the sentiment of the manufacturing sector through the survey of almost 500 private companies. So this naturally means that it does not track the manufacturing sentiment in the public sector enterprises. And these particular observations can be important for our preliminary examination as to if the PMI tracks the PSUs or not. So after understanding the basic points regarding the PMI, let us look at the comparison of this PMI with the Index of Industrial Production. Now, regarding the Index of Industrial Production and the Index of 8 core industries, you can go through the DNS of 12th November 2019. And we have discussed various aspects of the IIP and the Index of 8 core industries in details in this video which was published recently in the month of November. So you should go through this video to understand the basics of IIP. However, now we should compare the Purchasing Managers' Index with that of Index of Industrial Production. So by comparing the PMI and the IIP, we find that this PMI tracks only the investor's sentiment and it does not track the actual production. However, IIP tracks the actual production. Secondly, there is a difference in the publishing agencies of both these indices, and the first PMI is published by Nikkei. However, the Index of Industrial Production is published by NSO or the National Statistical Office. Third point of comparison is that it covers only private sector companies. However, the IIP covers both the private sector as well as the public sector. Fourthly, the PMI covers both the manufacturing as well as the services sector. And in case of IIP, it is only concerned with the manufacturing sectors, and that is why it covers only the manufacturing in India. Fifth is that the PMI is not used for GDP calculation, and that is mainly because it only tracks the investor's sentiment. However, as the IIP covers or tracks the actual production, it is used for GDP calculation to account for unorganized sector also. So these are few points of differences between the PMI, that is the Purchasing Managers' Index, and the Index of Industrial Production. And these can be important for us from preliminary examination point of view. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 11 has been written in the context of the opening of Kartarpur corridor. And it talks at leveraging the opportunity which has been created by the opening of Kartarpur corridor for improving the trade relations between India and Pakistan. So this article shall be important for us from General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic International Relations in India and its bilateral relations. And further, it also talks about the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade of the WTO, which can be important for us from the General Studies paper 3 under the topic Economic Development. Now, the author in this article argues that the India-Pakistan relationship has always been seen through the prism of Kashmir. However, the recent opening of Kartarpur corridor provides an opportunity and possibility for shifting the attention between the two countries from Kashmir towards the Punjab. And such window of opportunity can be leveraged by promoting bilateral trade between the two Punjabs in India and the Pakistan. And that is why there is a need for opening new trade corridors between the two Punjabs of India and Pakistan. So if you look at the map of India and Pakistan, you will find that Punjab was divided during the partition of India and Pakistan. And one portion of Punjab went to Pakistan while the other portion of Punjab remained in India. And recently, a people-to-people contact initiative has been established between the Punjab of India and the Punjab of Pakistan by the way of opening of Kartarpur corridor. And that is why the author wants that this window of opportunity should be leveraged to improve the trade relations between the two Punjabs of India and the Pakistan. And that is how India and Pakistan can improve their relationship by shifting their attention from Kashmir towards Punjab. Now, arguing for the importance of correlationship between the trade and peace, the author argues that there has always been a positive correlationship between trade and the peace in two countries. Now, if free trade is established between the two parts of Punjab, it will boost the ties between India and Pakistan by the way of creating interdependencies between the private sector of India and Pakistan and also the governments of both these countries. And these interdependencies create goodwill among the private sector and the people of both the sides. And thus, by improving the trade between the two parts, there can be net effect of fewer conflicts, and it can also lead to the prospects of more peaceful relationships between the two countries. So, a natural corollary of improving the trade relations between the two parts is improving the people to people interactions. And we note that a good initiative that has been started regarding the people to people interaction is the Kartarpur corridor's opening. So, in this case, the author argues the leveraging of the Punjabiyat between the two Punjabs of India and Pakistan. And in this case, it has been argued that Punjab can be made central to the India-Pakistan relationship by opening of new trade corridors which run through the two Punjabs of India and Pakistan. And these trade corridors could be developed with an aim to foster a free trade area between the two Punjabs. Now, such a free trade area which is created between the two Punjabs of India and Pakistan could allow absolute free trade in agricultural and industrial goods and services which originate in either of the Punjabs. And this can allow the agricultural products that originate in the Indian Punjab to get a preferential market access in the Punjab of Pakistan. And this could be highly beneficial for the farmers of Punjab. So on the one hand, it could provide benefits to the farmers of the Punjab, while on the other hand, it can act as a catalyst for the improvement of relationship between India and Pakistan. Now, creation of a free trade area which connects these two specific states of the countries is restricted because of one of the clauses of WTO's General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So in this background, let us look at what are these clauses of the WTO's GATT agreement and how can India and Pakistan create a free trade corridor connecting the Punjabs of both the parts. Now, for establishing free trade agreement between two countries, the WTO requires these countries to abide by two provisions under the GATT or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So this GATT agreement allows the WTO members to enter into a free trade agreement, and that should be subjected to two important conditions. The first is that they would be required to eliminate trade barriers on substantially all trade between these two countries. So thus, if a free trade agreement is established between the two countries, there should be elimination of trade barriers on almost all the products between these two countries. However, as argued in this article, the author says that a free trade agreement or corridor should be established between only two specific parts of Punjabs, and that too on specific products. The second condition is that the countries need to ensure that their tariff barriers vis-a-vis a third country are not higher than they were before entering into a free trade agreements. So the two countries which are entering into a free trade agreement also need to take care of the tariffs with that of the third or other countries. So when such conditions are necessary for entering into a free trade agreement, is it possible to create a smaller free trade area between India and Pakistan by the way of connecting the Punjabs of the two countries? So for creation of such free trade corridors, India and Pakistan can exploit the exemptions which have been provided to these countries under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade of WTO. The first exemption is that India and Pakistan can enter into a limited trade agreement, and which could cover mutually agreed goods and services. So in this case, they can limit the area which will enter such free trade agreement, and also they can limit the number of goods and services which can be a part of such a free trade corridor or free trade agreement. And both India and Pakistan have been allowed to depart from the general provisions of the GATT or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade from entering into a free trade agreement. So these two exemptions can be exploited by India and Pakistan for creating a limited free trade agreement between the Punjabs of both these countries. Now, such a special feature was included in the GATT as an acknowledgement that India and Pakistan have long constituted one economic unit prior to the partition of both these countries. And that is why these countries should be allowed the freedom to enter into special trading arrangements. And that is how India and Pakistan can utilize such special provisions which have been provided under the GATT to establish trade routes connecting the two Punjabs on the either side. Now, the present situation of volume of bilateral trade between India and Pakistan stands at around $2.5 billion. However, it is much below the potential of $37 billion which has been projected by the World Bank. Further, the trade relations between India and Pakistan have been adversely affected after the Pakistan government suspended all trade links when Indian government revoked the Article 370 in the state of Kashmir. So in this background, the author argues that creating a new trade corridor by leveraging the Punjabiyat and such a corridor from Chandigarh to Lahore can be the first principal move towards normalizing trade interactions between the two countries. And this can have far-reaching impact on the improvement in peaceful relationship between India and Pakistan. So this article had some aspects of relationship between India and Pakistan which could fall under the international relations in General Studies paper 2, and also these aspects are important for us from General Studies paper 3 under the topic economic development. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 10 has been written in the context of the World AIDS Day, which is observed by the UN members on 1st of December. And this article highlights that although in the past 2 decades, the efforts for reducing the HIV/AIDS cases are commendable, recently a slowdown in such a progress has been witnessed. And this slowdown has been due to a number of factors. So this becomes important for us from the General Studies paper 2 point of view under the topic issues relating to health. And in this article, we will look at some of the data related to the AIDS affected people. Also, what are the global efforts for reducing the instances of HIV/AIDS? After that, we will look at the challenges in controlling the issue of HIV/AIDS. And also we'll look at the Indian scenario and what is the approach that is being utilized by India for controlling the instances of AIDS. So first, let us look at the key data related to the prevalence of HIV in the world and what are the global efforts that are being undertaken presently. So according to the UN AIDS report of 2018, there are about 38 million people who are living with the HIV or the human immunodeficiency virus. Secondly, out of these 38 million people who are suffering from HIV, only 24 million people are receiving antiretroviral treatment. And this treatment aims at reducing the impact of HIV on the affected people. Thirdly, about 1.7 million new infections have been found, and this shows a 37% reduction as compared to the year 2000. However, 770,000 people have died from AIDS-related illness. And there has been 45% reduction in these deaths due to the new treatment or the antiretroviral therapy that has been discovered. And regarding the global efforts that are being undertaken to control the prevalence of HIV, the goal of ending HIV/AIDS epidemic by 2030 has been set up under the Sustainable Development Goal 3.3. And based on this Sustainable Development Goal, the UN AIDS has adopted a strategy that is known as the 90-90 strategy to end the epidemic of HIV/AIDS. So what is this 90-90-90 strategy? So this 90-90-90 strategy involves 90% people living with the HIV/AIDS should know that they are infected by this virus. And 90% of the people who are diagnosed with the HIV infection should receive the antiretroviral therapy which is seen as a treatment which reduces the impact of HIV infection and reduces the instances of death. And finally, 90% of the people who are receiving this antiretroviral therapy should have the suppression of the HIV virus. That is, its impact should be limited on these 90% people. Now, the current status regarding these targets is that 79% are only aware that they are infected by HIV virus. And only 62% are on treatment or are getting this antiretroviral therapy. And 53% people only have achieved the viral suppression. Now, after looking at the prevalence of HIV/AIDS at the global level, let us look at the Indian scenario. So, the total number of people living with HIV/AIDS in India are about 21.4 million. And annual mortality or deaths due to this HIV are about 69.11 thousand. And this has been a reduction by about 71% since the year 2005. And this has mainly been because of the various initiatives that have been started for controlling the AIDS in India. Now, the new infections account for about only 87.58 thousand, and this too has declined by more than 60% since 2000. Regarding the interstate variation, Maharashtra has the highest number of people who are suffering with or living with the HIV/AIDS. Further, Mizoram has the highest adult HIV prevalence in 2017, and this was followed by Manipur and Nagaland. Further, states like Telangana, Andhra, Karnataka, Goa, Maharashtra and Delhi have adult HIV prevalence higher than that of national average. And regarding the increase in annual new infections, the states like Assam, Mizoram, Meghalaya and Uttarakhand have registered increase in the number of new infections, while the lowest adult HIV prevalence was found in the state of or the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, in this background, let us look at the challenges that are faced in controlling the prevalence of HIV. Now, the first challenge for controlling the prevalence of HIV is that the key population accounts for almost half of all the new HIV infections worldwide. Now, this key population reflects the most vulnerable people who are likely to contract the HIV virus. And this includes high-risk groups and includes sex workers, gay men and other men who have sex with prisoners, migrants, refugees and the transgender people. And they have been identified as key populations who are likely to suffer more because of this infection. The second challenge is the complacency that has been witnessed due to good progress which has been witnessed in the last 2 decades. And this shows that now the attention is getting diverted from the HIV/AIDS to various other diseases. And that is why the global funding streams have identified other priorities as compared to this priority of controlling the HIV/AIDS infection. And due to this lack of awareness, the prevention-oriented behaviors have not been passed on to the new generation. Further, there has been vulnerability of adolescent girls who are sexually exploited by the various sections, and especially by older men. And further, majority of the societies are male-dominated, and that is why such behavior inflicts HIV infection onto unprotected, vulnerable women of these societies. So in this background, what should be done? And that has been highlighted by the author. So first is that there needs to be collaboration between health systems and individual communities, and which can successfully reduce the stigma and discrimination and deliver the services. Now, one of the biggest challenges is that there has been huge stigma attached to the HIV infected people. However, awareness needs to be created in the communities regarding the way in which this HIV virus is transmitted from one person to another. Secondly, preventive measures need to be taken and which can include the usage or increasing the use of contraceptives like condoms, etc. And then there is one therapy which is known as oral pre-exposure prophylaxis, and which can be administered to key populations which are likely to contract the HIV virus. So this is a prevention strategy in which if a HIV negative individual takes such anti-HIV medications, and if they come into contact with the people who are suffering from HIV, it reduces their risk of being infected. So this is basically a preventive measure which can be taken by people who are not suffering from HIV. And last but not the least, there is a need for strong political commitment and community engagement, and this can help in achieving the targets of 2030 which have been set under the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, what are the measures that should be taken by India? So first is that India should install or use a customized approach for handling the prevalence of HIV/AIDS instances in India. Now that is mainly because India has interstate variations regarding the prevalence of HIV/AIDS. Also, there are age-related variations and there are gender-related variations regarding the prevalence of HIV/AIDS. And that is why there is a need for customized approach which specifically targets the most vulnerable areas, most vulnerable gender, and also most vulnerable age group. And further, there is a need for strategic focus on the states which have the largest prevalence of HIV/AIDS. And these states include Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland, Telangana, etc. And that is mainly because these states have HIV incidence rate which is almost 4 times higher than that of the national average. And that is why there is a need for customized and focused approach for handling the issue of HIV/AIDS prevalence. Secondly, India has recently launched the Mission Sampark to achieve the 90-90-90 target which has been set by the UN AIDS program. And this strategy has been implemented to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal target of 3.3. Further, India needs to scale up the antiretroviral therapy, and that is mainly because the overall coverage of this therapy in India is still only about 56%. Now, as compared to this, the global target is of putting about 82% who are living with the HIV/AIDS virus on this antiretroviral therapy by the year 2020. So these are few aspects of the AIDS in India and across the globe. What are the various challenges for controlling the prevalence of HIV and what are the measures that have been taken by India? With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 8 is related to a 3D image or a 3D replica of the legendary elephant which was named as the Guruvayur Kesavan has been projected in one of the farmlands in Kerala's Wayanad district. And this can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the Indian art and culture. So here you should note that this Guruvayur Kesavan is the most famous and celebrated temple elephant in Kerala in India. Now, regarding the utility or the importance of the elephants for the temples, you should note that it is a common Hindu custom in Kerala to capture elephants either as calves or young adults from wilds, and these elephants are donated to the deity of the temple as an offering. And accordingly, this Guruvayur temple has in excess of 50 elephants. So the important fact that emerges for our preliminary examination is that this Guruvayur Kesavan is the temple elephant of Kerala, and second is the location of this temple. So both these facts can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, in today's newspaper, there are 2 articles which you can revise from the previous DNS videos. The first is on page number 10, and that is related to the telecom industry and the challenges that it is facing. And this has been discussed in detail in the Daily News Simplified of 3rd November 2019 by Nagendra sir, and it was discussed in the context of this article, that is, why is the telecom sector under stress? So you can go through this video and revise the various aspects of the stresses that are being felt by the telecom sector in India and what is the impact of this stressed telecom sector on the Indian economy. Further, this article on page number 11 talks about the issues of economic growth and the various structural issues in the Indian economy. And it says that the policies aimed solely at economic growth may fail to address more structural issues. So as we have noted that Indian government has set up the target of achieving $5 trillion economy by the year 2024. However, despite setting such an ambitious target, India is facing the problem of unemployment, etc., which was highlighted by the PLFS survey recently. And we have discussed various aspects or the challenges in reaching this target of $5 trillion economy in the DNS of 23rd November 2019 in detail. So again, you can go through this video to understand the various aspects of this issue in detail. Now, after today's discussion, let us take up these practice questions and the answer for them will be displayed after 5 seconds. The first question reads, consider the following statements about the Purchasing Managers Index. First is that it is published by NSO or the National Statistical Office, which is incorrect because it is published by NICI. Second is that it covers only private sector companies, which is correct. Hence the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. Second is that the Guruvayur temple elephant was found in which of the following states? So it is found in the state of Kerala. Third question is that consider the following statements about index of industrial production. It covers only manufacturing sector, which is correct. And second is that it is used for GDP calculation to account for unorganized sector, which is also correct. So the correct answer is C, both 1 and 2. With this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.